As a girl who loves the sea, I'm always drawn to the ocean, and I'm also drawn to any kind of artworks or even fashion or anything that is reminiscent of the ocean. So when I heard about the latest exhibition on timeless textiles that had a decidedly nautical feel, I stepped inside. And actually, I feel like I'm surrounded by coral. The artist behind the work is Meredith Woolnough. Meredith, how on earth do you make that look like coral? Are you sure it's not coral?
I'm definitely sure it's not coral. I have made it. So it's definitely not coral. We don't like to put the real thing on our walls.
What have you done with, say, this piece here that looks like an actual branch of red and orange coral from the coral reef? But boy, it looks as though that's exactly where it's come from, maintaining all of its vivid colour. How have you done that?
Well, it's actually an innovative form of embroidery that I developed when I was at uni a few years ago now, but I've been pushing it since then. So it's a type of free-form embroidery where you're sewing on the machine, but you set the machine up basically so it's just a drawing tool, and you're drawing it on to a fabric base that's water-soluble. Once you've built it up so that it's really, really dense, you wash all the water-soluble fabric away and you're just left with the skeleton stitches. So it's all embroidery, and the different colours are different coloured threads. It's not dyed or anything like that. It's just different combinations of different colours to try and get that gradation and get that richness of colour.
I've never met anyone who's invented their very own embroidery technique.
I can't take full credit for it. I definitely didn't invent it. It's a standard sewing technique. It's used in lots of different applications, often in sort of craft-based quilting applications. I've just sort of taken it off the quilt and made it into sort of a bit of a sculpture of its own.
It does look very much like a sculpture, but to think it's a sculpture made out of an embroidery technique, that's taking it to another level again. And as I look at this particular piece, just as we arrive in, it's called Large Red Coral Branch, which is pretty much what it looks like. It's almost a metre in height and width, but it looks like it's a continuous piece of stitching. Is it, or have you connected various sections together?
This one is one whole piece of stitching, so I just sort of start in one section and just keep building upon it. Some of the other pieces are several pieces and they're actually multi-layered, so I've done several pieces and then had to stitch them together at appropriate points so that you get that layered effect. But this particular one is one great big piece. It's probably the biggest piece that I've ever attempted, and it took a very long time, but I love it, so it's all worth it.
I love it too. It's very delicate and just, I want to touch it as though it is an actual piece of coral.
It's a bit like a specimen there behind the glass. You're not allowed to touch it, but you really want to. Very tactile.
I guess you couldn't have anything nautical or sea-based without a nautilus. Absolutely. And there's a giant nautilus, all in white. It almost looks like it's felted.
It's actually the same technique, and the only thing, it's just this is one colour, and when I actually dissolved it, I moulded it around a shape, so it's got that a little bit more dimension to give it a little bit more of something, I suppose.
It's quite magnificent. Now, those women and gents in the Hunter who are into the sort of stitching technique that you've started with here, the quilters, and there's many of them here in the Hunter, I think they'd be intrigued by a young artist even getting into this form in the first place. What hooked you into it?
Well, I stumbled across this technique when I was studying. I did a degree in fine arts down in Sydney at the College of Fine Arts, and basically it was just one of very many techniques that we were shown. And when I first learned it, I didn't really think much of it. I was like, oh yeah, that's another one. And then it was only when I decided to do my honours year, I decided I really wanted to hone in on this technique and try and push it further than it had been taken before. So I sort of started then, and I guess over the years I've just gotten more and more detailed in what I'm doing and really pushing scale and structure and trying to make things more sculptural, larger and more exact, I suppose.
Is your sewing machine huge?
No, it's a very basic sewing machine.
You're kidding?
No, not at all.
I thought it was I imagine some fancy machine.
You're basically stripping it down to it's just a needle going up and down. So it doesn't need to be anything fancy. I used to work on a machine that was older than me, and it was just got a little bit old and clunky. And when I did have a little bit of success, I did upgrade to a much nicer machine, but it's nothing fancy and I don't use it in any fancy way. It's actually very simple.
Extraordinary that you can produce out of a sewing machine that I can't even use to hem, that you can produce something as detailed and sculptured as this.
Oh, well, thank you.
Now, you're a young artist who's come from Sydney to Newcastle.
Yes.
What's the draw card?
The draw card, well, I'd love to say it's art, but the draw cards actually love...
Oh, that's one of our favourite draw cards.
Yes, I moved up here because my fiancé lives up here. We were apart for a few years and, I finally made the change and a bit of a career change. And now that I'm up here, I'm pursuing my art a lot more. I used to work full-time as a teacher and now I'm just teaching casually and this is my main focus and I'm loving it.
What do you think you might find here in Newcastle to make that journey or this chapter of your artistic development?
Well, I really don't know, but one thing I have noticed since coming here is there's a really lovely sense of community here in Newcastle. You would think that Sydney, being bigger, having so much going on, having these amazing big galleries, would have a big art scene, but I've actually found it's stronger and perhaps more accessible here in Newcastle. I've made some great connections with some wonderful people and artists, and that's really encouraging as someone who's starting to try to get somewhere as an artist. So I found it a really nurturing environment, which has been great.
And just finally, Meredith, for those in the community here that do love quilting and needlework, who work with many of the same materials that you do, who might be sort of, on the edge of, oh no, I'm dealing with craft, not art, what do you think is an inspiration maybe to them to sort of evolve their work?
I think that definition between craft and art, it's always been a big argument. It's dangerous territory. But I think if you really want to see yourself as an artist, you have to put yourself into that mindset. You also have to really believe in what you're doing. I think getting your inspiration from art is really necessary, and not just textiles art. The Biennale's on at the moment. You've got to go to Sydney to see that. There's so many wonderful things around that you can get your inspiration from. And if, the sort of craft-based world isn't really what you're thinking you're belonging to, you need to start pushing yourself into art, because textile art is really exciting and it's really and it's amazing, but it's still sort of under the radar for a lot of people and for a lot of things because of its connection to craft. So we really want to try and push it, and places like this gallery are doing that really successfully.